At MIT, a brilliant math professor, Gerald Lambo, challenged his graduate students with a super tough problem. He wrote it on the board outside his classroom, promising fame on the MIT tech for anyone who could solve it. He even told them that only top mathematicians had cracked similar problems in the past. The students had until the end of the semester. Will Hunting, a janitor at MIT, saw the problem and it caught his eye. Later, at home, he scribbled away in his bathroom mirror, trying to work it out. The next day, when the hallway was empty, he boldly wrote the answer on the board with chalk. Outside of work, Will hung out with his best friends Chucky, Billy, and Morgan. They drank, they laughed, and they got into trouble. One day, at a kid's baseball game, Will spotted a bully from his childhood. Later, Will and his friends confronted the bully, and a fight broke out. Will lost control and beat the guy badly. The police arrived, and in the chaos, Will hit an officer. He ended up in jail. Back at MIT, Professor Lambo's students told him someone had solved the problem. He rushed to the board and was stunned to see the correct answer. He asked around, but no one admitted to solving it. Professor Lambo's next class was packed. Everyone wanted to know who the mystery math whiz was. The professor asked the genius to come forward, but the room remained silent. Determined to find this hidden talent, Professor Lambo wrote up a new, even harder problem, one that had taken him 2 years to solve. Meanwhile, Will was released from jail. Almost immediately, he went back to MIT and started working on the new problem on the board. Professor Lambo caught him in the act and thought Will was vandalizing the board. Will ran. Later, Professor Lambo returned and realized what had happened. The problem that had taken him 2 years, Will had solved it in just a short time. He finally knew who the mysterious math genius was. Later, Will and his buddies went to a bar. Chucky, spotting some attractive women, went over to flirt. Trying to impress them, he pretended to be in their college class. Another guy overheard and challenged Chucky, asking which class. Chucky blurted out history. The guy was actually in their history class and knew Chucky was lying. He started quizzing Chucky about history to embarrass him. Chucky was stumped, so Will stepped in. He effortlessly debated the guy, throwing out facts and his own insightful opinions. When the guy tried to counter, Will finished his sentence for him, pointing out that he was just reciting a passage from a book. Will teased him for spending a fortune on an education he could have gotten for free at the library. Humiliated, the guy walked away. One of the women, Skylar, came over and gave Will her number. Impressed by his intelligence, she asked him to call her for drinks sometime. Will later flashed the number to the defeated history student. Meanwhile, Professor Lambo was hunting for the janitor, who'd solved his math problems. After asking around, he finally tracked Will down. He found Will in court, facing charges for assaulting the police officer. Will tried to defend himself, but the judge listed his long record of petty crimes and assaults. The judge refused to let him off easy and set bail at $50,000. Will was headed back to jail, but Professor Lambo had a proposition. He'd talk to the judge and could get the charges dropped. But Will had to agree to 2 things: study math with Professor Lambo and attend therapy sessions. Will laughed at the idea of therapy, but to stay out of jail, he agreed. He started math lessons with Professor Lambo, who was blown away by Will's natural talent. Then came the therapy. Will went to therapist after therapist, but he refused to open up. He'd even read their books the night before just to make fun of them during the sessions. Desperate, Professor Lambo turned to his old friend Sean McGuire, a psychology professor at a community college. Sean initially said he didn't have time, but Professor Lambo insisted, explaining that Will was a genius who needed guidance to reach his full potential. Sean finally agreed to meet Will. In their first session, Sean asked Professor Lambo and his assistant to leave. Just like with the others, Will started mocking Sean's books. Sean, recognizing Will's defensive tactics, stayed calm and chatted casually, avoiding personal questions. Will noticed a painting Sean had done. Quoting art books, Will made incorrect assumptions about Sean's life. Sean remained unfazed until Will mentioned his wife. That hit a nerve. Will, sensing Sean's vulnerability, kept pushing, even asking if Sean's wife had cheated. Sean snapped, grabbing Will by the throat and warning him never to disrespect his wife. Will calmly declared the session over and left, convinced he'd broken another therapist. Professor Lambo thought Sean would quit, but surprisingly, Sean scheduled another session. Afterward, Will went on a date with Skylar. He learned she came from a wealthy family and attended Harvard. They clicked instantly, enjoying each other's company and ending the night with a kiss. The next week, Sean took Will to a park. He admitted he'd thought about Will's comments on his painting and realized Will was just a young guy who didn't know what he was talking about. Sean explained that just as Will couldn't understand Sean's life from art books, Sean couldn't understand Will's problems. Just because he had a psychology degree, he understood Will's fear of opening up, but told him that eventually he'd have to talk to experience true happiness. Back in his routine, Will's friend Chucky picked him up for work at a construction site. Will had Skylar's number but was too nervous to call. In his third therapy session, neither Will nor Sean spoke a word. They sat in silence for the entire hour. The fourth session began the same way until, out of boredom, Will cracked a joke. Sean seized the opportunity and asked if Will had a girlfriend. Will admitted he'd met Skylar but hadn't contacted her since their first date. He felt Skylar was too good for him and worried he'd mess things up. Sean told him that nobody's perfect. Everyone has flaws, and what matters is finding someone who's perfect for you. To illustrate, Sean shared a funny story. His wife, the most beautiful woman he'd ever known, used to fart in her sleep. The room erupted in laughter. The tension broke, and Will began to feel comfortable around Sean. The session ended with Sean advising Will not to worry about Skylar being too good, but to consider if they'd be happy together. Will was so absorbed in this thought that Sean had to remind him the session was over. Inspired, Will went to Skylar's dorm and asked her out again. Skylar wanted to go, but she had a complicated problem to solve that could take hours or even days. Will, impatient, solved it on a napkin and handed it to her. Free from her studies, Skylar and Will went on their second date. Skylar asked about his family, and Will, on the spot, lied about having 12 brothers. Skylar asked for their names, and Will rattled off 12 random ones. Skylar, suspicious, asked him to repeat them. Will, being a genius, recited the names in perfect order. In his next therapy session, Will asked Sean if he ever regretted meeting his wife, knowing the pain he'd feel after her death. Sean shared the story of how they met. He'd been waiting in line with friends for tickets to a legendary baseball game. Will got excited, assuming Sean had seen the game live. Sean described the game in detail, building up the moment, then revealed he'd actually watched it on TV. He'd left his friends to go on a date with the woman who would become his wife. Will was stunned. Sean had given up a historic game for a girl. Returning to Will's question, Sean said he never regretted missing the game and certainly didn't regret the years he had with his wife, even though they were few. Skylar wanted to meet Will's friends and family. Still lying about his life, Will reluctantly agreed to introduce her to his friends. At a bar, Skylar hit it off with Will's friends, laughing and joking with them. Meanwhile, Professor Lambeau asked Sean about Will's progress. Sean explained that Will was opening up slowly, but needed more time to discuss his past and his fear of trust. Professor Lambeau revealed he was setting up job interviews for Will at prestigious math institutes, believing that once Will's emotional issues were resolved, he could become a renowned mathematician. Sean argued against making decisions for Will, emphasizing the importance of supporting his own choices. Professor Lambeau, however, was determined not to let Will's talent go to waste. Will, uninterested in these jobs, sent Chucky to an interview in his place. One night, Skylar asked Will to move to California with her. Panic-stricken, Will refused. Skylar pressed him, asking why he was afraid of commitment and why he never told her the truth, bringing up the lie about his 12 brothers. Called out, Will exploded. He confessed to being an orphan, shuffled between foster homes, and abused by one of his foster fathers. Skylar, heartbroken, offered her support and love. Will, terrified of abandonment, pushed her away, claiming he didn't love her. He left Skylar crying in her room. After much persuasion from Professor Lambeau, Will went to another job interview, but he deliberately sabotaged it. In therapy, Sean asked who Will trusted most. Will answered, Chucky. Sean pointed out that while Chucky would do anything for Will, he couldn't truly understand Will's deeper emotions. He asked Will about his career plans. Will said he'd work construction in Boston for the rest of his life. Sean confronted Will's fear of leaving his comfort zone, explaining how it would prevent him from living a fulfilling life. Sean didn't push the jobs Professor Lambeau had arranged, but asked Will what he wanted to do. Will jokingly said he wanted to be a shepherd. Seeing Will wasn't serious, Sean told him to leave, refusing to waste time if Will wouldn't be honest. Before Skylar left for California, Will called to say goodbye. Hoping to reconcile, Skylar told Will she loved him. Will smiled, but fear of heartbreak kept him from saying it back. Talking with Chucky, Will said he wasn't taking a job and had broken up with Skylar. He planned to stay in Boston, work construction with Chucky, and live next door to him. Chucky got real with Will. He was tired of seeing Will waste his potential. He confessed his secret wish. Every day when he picked Will up, he wished Will wasn't there. He wished Will would leave their dead-end lives and pursue something meaningful. Professor Lambeau confronted Sean about Will's refusal to use his gifts. Sean argued against pressuring Will, explaining his fear of abandonment and how he pushed people away. He believed they should support Will's choices, not force a career he might hate. Professor Lambeau disagreed, warning Sean not to let Will think it was okay to squander his intelligence and become a failure. Their disagreement escalated into a heated argument, with Professor Lambeau accusing Sean of being jealous of his success. Sean retorted that he wasn't a failure, because he'd never chosen to be like Professor Lambeau. Just then, Will arrived and overheard. Professor Lambeau left, and the therapy session began. Sean had a file of photos showing the bruises Will had suffered from his foster father. He asked Will if he'd ever seen anything like it. Sean then revealed his own childhood trauma, describing how his alcoholic father beat him and his mother. Will, hearing Sean's story, remembered his own abuse. Sean stepped close to Will and told him, "It wasn't your fault." Will nodded, but Sean repeated it over and over. Will insisted he knew, but Sean persisted until Will broke down, sobbing and hugging Sean tightly. He finally released the pain of his past. He told Sean he'd take one of the jobs. This was their last session. Will asked to stay in touch, and Sean assured him he was always there, encouraging Will to follow his heart. They hugged goodbye. For Will's 21st birthday, Chucky, Billy, and Morgan gave him a car. Not new, but a gift from his best friends. Professor Lambeau apologized to Sean and they reconciled. Sean announced he was taking a trip around the world. As Sean packed, Will drove by and watched. He left a letter in Sean's mailbox and drove off. Later, Chucky went to pick up Will. He knocked, got no answer, and looked inside. Will was gone. Chucky smiled, knowing Will had finally chosen his own path. Sean read Will's letter. Will wasn't taking the job. He was going to California to be with Skylar. Sean smiled. The movie ends with Will on the road, driving to California to reunite with Skylar. Thanks for sticking with us through Will Hunting's incredible journey. What did you think of his transformation? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing movie recaps.